The Time Traveler's Resort and Museum by David McLean. In any other bar, the man sitting next to her would have been considered decidedly odd, but at this place he seemed to blend in like sugar in water. He was dressed like a World War I flying ace, wearing a leather jacket, white scarf and leather cap, with a pair of antique motorcycle goggles perched on top of his head. The latter was especially odd, since he was also wearing glasses. Alice found herself staring at him. "I know," he said without looking at her. "I shouldn't be drinking before I go out to fly, but the Red Baron drinks like a fish." Alice laughed. The man put down his drink to look at her, and then suddenly everything on his face seemed to stop. "Have we met?" the flying ace asked. He looked like he was about 30, and spoke with a sort of flat American accent that Alice tended to associate with places like Iowa. His eyebrows had gone so far up on his head that they were hidden underneath his leather hat. "I don't think so," Alice said, furrowing her brow. Certainly she would have remembered someone who dressed so oddly. Granted, it was possible that he didn't always dress like that, but it seemed to follow that if you were willing to don an early 20th century flying helmet for a casual drink at the pub, then you probably weren't a T-shirt and jeans guy. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "My mistake," he said awkwardly. He suddenly seemed to be trying very hard to look at absolutely everything in the world but her. Alice couldn't help noticing that he was drinking the same odd drink that the bartender had given her. "You're here for the astronomy conference?" he asked. This was, to say the very least, surprising, especially since although the man had phrased the sentence as a question, it sounded as though he already knew the answer. Alice answered his question with one of her own. "How did you know that?" The flying ace looked embarrassingly smug, an expression that American men seem to deal in almost exclusively. "Well, the world's sexiest astrophysicist can hardly be expected to walk into this place and not be noticed," he said. Alice blushed slightly. "Michio Kaku owes me a sash," she mumbled irritably. "Michio Kaku has never stepped into this bar," the flying ace said. "Pity. I would buy him a drink." "That drink?" Alice asked, pointing to the pink concoction they'd both been drinking. "The bartender poured me one." "He must think you're special." "It had quina lillet in it. Probably going to cost me a fortune." "Probably, but everything good involves a little sacrifice." Alice stared at the man. She had the odd sort of feeling that she'd seen him before. "Are you going to the astronomy conference? It would be nice to see a few young faces." He smiled. "It's been my experience that the attendees of the Royal Astronomy Conference tend to think that life begins when you're at least as old as a quasar. I'm surprised that you're going, actually." "The current holder of the Isaac Newton chair is embarrassed that I have more Twitter followers than him," Alice admitted. "The current holder of the Isaac Newton chair looks like he should be playing a game of riddles with Bilbo Baggins and talking about his favorite golden ring," the flying ace said. "You, on the other hand—" Alice, who sensed that now might be an appropriate time to get offended, raised her eyebrows haughtily. "My audience is comprised of students who are interested in astronomy," she insisted. "Let's just agree that your audience is interested in heavenly bodies at rest and in motion, and let's leave it at that," he suggested. There was a silence. There is nothing quite as ugly as a long journey followed by an unbearable truth. "It's a shame," the flying ace said then, "because you could knock down Einstein. Right hook, third round, you take him down." Alice probably should have found a politer way to ask what she said next. "Who are you?" she asked. The man stretched out a gloved hand. "My name," he said, "is—"
"Alice!" a voice called. "Alice, my drink isn't going to consume itself, dear."
Alice grabbed Wendy's drink and stood up. "My sister is without alcohol," she said. "It isn't a pretty sight." The flying ace raised his glass, and Alice walked back to her table. She spent the next 22 minutes and 34 seconds listening to her sister talk about the joys of being wealthy and English. She would not remember this later on. She would not remember the flight from that morning, or exactly how she made it from the airport to the hotel. These were fairly unimportant details that would be washed away in the ocean of time. She would remember the phone call from Malcolm, as it was the last time she would ever talk to him, and she would be forced to recount the details later on. She would also remember the drink, the first of many she would have at the Gristle and Thorn. The bartender, as it turned out, had been quite right to bring it to her, as well as the odd dress of the other customers. More than anything else, she would remember the phrase, "Have we met?" because over the next few years she would hear it many times, in many different places. You see, Alice didn't know it yet, but there was a reason that everyone in the pub was dressed so strangely, why the bartender knew her drink better than she did, and why the Flying Ace had known so much about her. The Gristle and Thorn, as it turns out, is a time traveller's bar,